Question. There is something called false memory syndrome, which often comes about due to certain forms of therapy, hypnosis and EMDR being two of them, both of which you and the masters have recommended to students of the teachings. With this syndrome, what happens is they peel away the layers to get to the truth, remembering something perhaps not quite correctly, but it's reinforced and it's looked at again by the practitioner. And essentially the memory isn't quite the right memory, but then gets reinstalled, reprogrammed in your head as being the absolute fact, and particularly hypnosis does this. What do you have to say about this? Well, the first thing I would say is that what I and the Ascended Masters are recommending is not hypnosis, it's hypnotherapy. And personally, I find that hypnotherapy is actually a very unfortunate name because it implies that you are being hypnotized, meaning you are in a trance. And therefore, there is a person hypnotizing you and your mind is overpowered, or the therapist has power over your mind because you're in a trance. You're not fully conscious. And that's not hypnotherapy. I know there are practitioners who use hypnosis to uncover these memories. There was, from probably 20, 25 years ago, there was a certain psychologist in the United States who had developed this program where they use hypnosis. I can't remember their specific names, but basically the majority of the people who came to them had remembered suddenly being abused in childhood. And later, after a few years, some people started realizing it wasn't actually true. They had, as the questioner says, false memory syndrome. And therefore it became discredited in psychological circles, or at least people became much more careful about how they were using this. But this was hypnosis. Now, hypnotherapy, the way I have used it, is basically a guided meditation. You're not in a trance. You could break it off at any time. And therefore, you are much less likely to experience a false memory syndrome. I'm not saying it can't happen. I personally have not experienced it. I haven't met anybody who did. I haven't met anybody who experienced it from EMDR. But of course, I'm not saying it can't happen. So here's how I look at the resolution of psychology. Whenever I go into any kind of therapy, use any kind of therapy, the purpose is to resolve something in my psychology, some hang-up, some subconscious self that I have. And in my view, these were, for most of us, developed in past lifetimes. They started in past lifetimes. So this means that the purpose of the therapy for me is to resolve this pattern, this self. It's not to uncover certain facts. I have, for example, never attempted during therapy to uncover a previous lifetime because I don't believe the specifics are very important. So in other words, what is important for me is that you resolve the psychological mechanism, and this is what I call the subconscious self, which we all have in our subconscious mind. A specific subconscious self was created in a specific situation, and it could be that you were exposed to sexual abuse, for example, in a past lifetime. So there was a specific situation where a specific person or people exposed you to this sexual abuse. This created a subconscious self. What is important for you now is to uncover the subconscious self, not to uncover the exact situation where it happened. You don't need to know the specifics of it. For example, the Ascended Masters are given tools for uncovering subconscious selves in a book called Healing Your Spiritual Traumas. But it's not the purpose there to see the exact situation where you created the subconscious self. The purpose is to see the belief that you adopted and then resolve that belief. So that's why, for me, if I had been in therapy and I had uncovered a memory like that, a specific memory, especially if it was from this lifetime, I would be extremely cautious about taking it literally. I would say, okay, maybe there is, obviously there is a subconscious self behind this that I need to resolve, and maybe this specific memory is just to help me go through that process. So in other words, I wouldn't take it literally that I was actually abused as a child. Now, I am not thereby, and this is where things get complicated, like all human psychology gets complicated the more you look into it. There are, of course, people that were sexually abused as children and have suppressed it. And if that was the case, then yes, it may indeed be valid and necessary to uncover it. But I would assume, I haven't experienced this myself, so perhaps I'm out to lunch here, but I would assume that if you had been sexually abused in this lifetime and had suppressed it, you could resolve the psychology without knowing the specifics. I would assume that. Now, obviously, if it's in this lifetime and the person can be held accountable for what they were doing, it's important to uncover the memory so that the person can be held accountable. But I'm just saying that I think it's very, very possible that during therapy you are touching upon a subconscious self that was created in a past lifetime. And your subconscious mind can project onto that situation or that subconscious self specifics that you interpret to be in this lifetime. I think that's entirely possible, and I think many psychologists have realized that false memory syndrome is a possibility. So what am I basically saying here? I'm saying that if I had uncovered a memory like that, I would be very, very cautious about taking it literally. I would first of all seek to work on the psychology behind it and see if I could resolve the psychology completely. And then I would give a lot of decrees, especially to the violet flame, to consume any kind of energy, any kind of tension I have in me, and therefore resolve as much as possible, so that I could come to a point where I was completely neutral. And I could look at this, is it a true memory or is it a false memory? And I could evaluate it without any kind of emotional energy pulling on me, or without any beliefs that this should be true. And so in other words, I'd be really, really cautious about it. I have met many people over the years on the spiritual path that came to the belief that they were a particular person in a past lifetime, often a famous person, right? And obviously when my logical, rational mind says, well, you can't have more than one person who was Napoleon in a past lifetime, right? It's pretty unlikely. So how do we explain this? That there are many spiritual people, you can find several spiritual people who believe they were the same famous person in a past lifetime. And the way I've explained this is that famous people come to represent a kind of psychological archetype. And this means that many of us can have the same type of psychology as Napoleon or Abraham Lincoln or this or that person. And in order to resolve that psychology, it may be helpful for a while to believe, oh, I was that person. I was Marie Antoinette. Which I wasn't, of course. So that you take it more seriously by looking into the psychology and resolving it. The unfortunate thing is that what often happens is that the outer mind, the ego, says, oh yeah, I was this famous person. And they hold on to that. And they decide this is the way it is. And they don't look at the psychology. So what I'm saying is that this is also a false memory. A false memory of a past life. But it has a purpose to help you resolve psychology. And then when you have resolved the psychology, you should be able to say, oh yeah, maybe I wasn't Napoleon after all. And I think I'm sorry I'm laughing. I don't mean to imply that I'm not taking people seriously when they have this, but I just have seen so many times over the years how we as spiritual people, we can get so wrapped up in specifics that are so important to us. I look back at myself. There were situations where it was so important to me to prove a certain point, or how other people looked at me. And now I look back at it and I thought, oh my God, how was that so important? You know, and to me, this is the point of resolving psychology, is we come to a point where it just isn't important anymore. You are free of it. And this means that if you were actually abused in this lifetime, if it was a correct memory, of course the person should be held accountable. But you should hopefully come to a point where you are free of the situation. You can move on with your life. That's what I would hope for you. And of course, if you had a false memory, I would hope you can also become free of that. And whatever actions or reactions you had to that false memory, you could forgive yourself and move on. Because it's all just psychology. I mean, honestly, everything we go through, it's not the outer situation that affects us, it's our reaction to it. And our reaction, it's all psychology. And it really is a matter of not being so focused on the outer things, but looking at what is the psychology that makes this affect me. And when you see those separate selves and you let them die, you're free, not only of the events that happen, but you're free of the structure in your own mind that made this so important to you, made this have such an impact on you. Then you can come to that point the Buddha talked about where you have no attachments. And Jesus talked about the Prince of this world cometh and has nothing in me. And that's certainly what I hope for all people, and especially for Ascended Master students who are actively working on your psychology. You come to that point where you can just let it drop. It just drops away from you.